Well, hello there. Welcome to a reading wrap-up featuring me, Lexi. I hope you guys are taking care of yourself. I have not posted a wrap-up for a long time. We're not gonna say how many months it's been. It's been a little while. The end of the year always makes things a little bit weird, but not this weird. Definitely not this weird. This is kind of nuts for me. This is going to be ideally a very casual, cool video. We're just gonna hang out together, talk about some books that I've read, have a good time. We might even have a good time. Wouldn't that be nice? You might be thinking to yourself, Lexi, it's been literally months since you finished some of these books. However, will you remember what you thought of them, considering that your memory is honestly kind of a sieve? Good question, concerned citizen, but never fear. I try to take notes on every book that I finish, especially when I have a feeling it might be a little while before I do a wrap-up. So I have notes for everything, just a little gift from past me to present us. But what I don't have is a script. This might shock you. I usually script like everything I do on this channel, so this is going to be an adventure. This is going to be like the Wild West of reading wrap-ups, but I don't spoil anything in these videos. I don't like spoilers. I think it's dumb to spoil something that you want other people to read or that you think somebody else might like, even if I didn't like it myself. But obviously I am talking about these books. I'm like telling you what they're about. I'm giving you my thoughts, feelings, and opinions in a review format, so I'm not going to be spoiling anything explicitly, but you know, your mileage may vary. I don't know. If you want to go into books knowing nothing about them, I would just not watch videos about books on the internet. What else do I have to share with you? We have like 20 books to get through, by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet. This is everything from the end of last year and also like half of March. Will we get back to bi-monthly wrap-ups? I sure hope so. I sure hope I don't do this to myself again in the future, but this is what we have for now. We have to catch up. It must be done. We have a wide range, full spectrum wrap-up today. Lots of books that were pretty good. Lots of books that were that were less good. Lots to discuss. Lots of fun things to unpack together. But before we get into the actual wrap-up, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN, and for those of you who use YouTube frequently but do not yet know what a VPN is, the point of a VPN is to take your data and encrypt it, so that way whatever it is that you're doing stays private. One of the ways that it does that is by swapping your digital location with some other new digital location somewhere else in the world. For me, a normal person who does, I would say, mostly normal things on the internet, by far the most useful way to use Surfshark, in my opinion, is to access things on streaming services that you subscribe to that, for whatever reason, are not available inside of either your home country or a country that you're traveling within. I remember using Surfshark when I was in Australia a few years ago for like a college thing to watch the season finale of Survivor 43. Honestly, forgettable season, but not a forgettable Surfshark experience. We are thankful that it got me to that very strange, bitter end. But yeah, you'd be surprised how useful Surfshark can be when you have a use case that's similar to that. Also, if you do like a lot of public Wi-Fi stuff in airports or in cafes and you're paranoid about the privacy of your connection, that's like the original theoretical point of VPNs. That's one of the main problems it's supposed to solve. So it is super useful to have on demand when you need it. And if you are at all interested in checking them out, you can head on down to the link in my description, surfshark.com/newlynova, and you can use the code newlynova to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Well, yes, you have in fact returned to the video. You have successfully conquered the sponsored segment. Congratulations. One more ground rule that I forgot to say, just to preserve my sanity. If I've talked about these books before in either Best or Worst Books 2025, I'm gonna be like super brief with them. There are places that you can go if you want to see my thoughts and opinions on books that I've already read in different places on this channel, and we have too much to do together for me to dedicate like 45 minutes of footage per each of these 20 books. We have to draw the line somewhere. Anyways, now we're going back in time to November. November of 2025, the day that I first embarked on the journey of reading the books that would ultimately make it into this video. The first book that we're talking about today is actually a full series. I know, me finishing a series. This is so crazy. This crazy thing happened to me where I blacked out on Instagram and saw these really pretty Owl Crate special editions of the Emily Wilde series. Just look at these. Look at the naked hardcovers. Look at the art inside with the gold foiling. These particular sprayed edges, not my favorite, but you know what? Everything else kind of makes up for it for me. Anyways, I saw these online, and even though at the time I had only read the first book, it was so weird. Like, I blacked out and then I just woke up with $100 fewer in my bank account. And then a couple of months later, my box of tax-deductible Emily Wilde special editions just like arrived mysteriously at my doorstep. So don't know what the deal with that was, but yeah, after that point, I could not look at myself in the mirror if I did not finish this series. I can't be dropping any amount of money on books that look like this without at least following through and reading them and seeing if I like them or if they should go to a better home. But if you have never heard of Emily Wilde before, let me tell you what it's about now that I've read throughout the whole series. This book follows a woman named Emily who lives inside of a version of the world that is like analog to normal Earth, except with the addition of fairies. The fairies inside of this world overall are much more like the Cruel Prince variety of fairy, where they're very whimsical and eccentric, but also oftentimes very cruel. Like they don't have very much empathy towards mortals. They don't really see them as people. Very sadistic vibes in how mortals are oftentimes treated, at least by the high class of fae. They're just these eternal, chaotic, selfish creatures. And Emily is a dryadologist, I think is the word in this book, which means that she is a professor that specializes in the study of fairies. And the field is very similar to anthropology because of how connected fairies are to the concept of stories and lore. In the first book, Emily is working on the first ever comprehensive encyclopedia of fairies, which is something that she is at the forefront of. Nobody else has ever tried to do something like that for all of the fairy types inside of the whole world. And the last type of fairy that she has to research is a fairy that nobody really knows anything about, that lives inside of this Scandinavian, almost like Greenland coded place. And so she goes there to interview all of the local people about this spooky, creepy, kind of evil variant of fairy that's like stealing their children and wiping their memories or whatever. And maybe even in her dreams, she will make contact with them because she honestly has like no instinct at all for self-preservation because of how into her work she is. Like that would be one of the coolest things that could happen to her, even if it's super duper dangerous. That's the kind of person that she is. But of course, the last piece of the puzzle is she's followed on this journey by her colleague, whose name is Wendell. Wendell is affectionately just a complete disaster of a person. Like he brings his cabal of grad students wherever he goes, makes them do everything for him and like wait on him hand and foot. He is super lazy overall, but also suddenly very not lazy sometimes as well about like the weirdest things. And on paper, he's a terrible professor, horrible researcher, pretty vain, annoying, unlikable. But Emily keeps him around because she is 99% convinced that Wendell himself is some kind of fairy who has managed to infiltrate the grad department at her university for some reason. And obviously it's pretty nice to have a fairy around when you're doing things like investigating and learning about a new type of fairy. Like it's pretty cool to have somebody with firsthand experience there. And yeah, that's what this is. They go on adventures together. That's really the whole series. I think that this series gets mismarketed a lot as a romantasy because it is a fantasy series that has a romance subplot that is actually like pretty important, I would say, to the overall arc of all three books, but it doesn't read like one. And in fact, I would argue that because the structure of the book is you're reading the journal of Emily Wilde, who is a professor who's kind of pretentious and annoying, with love, because she deserves to be. She knows what she's talking about, but like she is a professor at a very prestigious university. What that means is that her journals are kind of dry. The writing style of this series is pretty literary, I would say, compared to most fantasy romance that I've read. Emily spends a lot of time in these books writing what are essentially academic records, right? And she's citing all of these different stories in her, again, kind of anthropology vibes field. And you have to like that in order to like these books. You have to like the writing style. I think if you find it dry or boring, you will have a miserable time. It does not change. It does not get better in the other two books. But for me, as a reader, this was not a con because I really like Emily. I love how she thinks. I love how she maneuvers around the world. And the romance, at least in book one, is very slow burn, especially because Wendell is just such a piece of work. All of the rumors are true. All of those horrible things I said about him earlier are 100% parts of his character because he is kind of a selfish prick, but I also still really liked him because in addition to those negative traits, he also has a bunch of positive characteristics. Like he's really, really good with reading people. He's really good at making friends, which is great because Emily is not so good at making friends. But what I like most about Wendell is obsessed with Emily, but not in a way that is possessive or controlling. He's just entirely addicted to like rooting for her. He has this unfaltering belief in her intelligence and in her competence. And a lot of his best character moments are just him truly seeing her as a teammate. In fact, as the better teammate on their team of two. And I love that. Wendell, for all of his fuck-ups, is a man who yearns remarkably effectively. And I buy that he would do anything for Emily, almost because of how little he does for like anything else inside of his life. And I know I said this back when I read the first book for the first time like a year and a half ago, but the book in the series overall has a buddy cop kind of dynamic to it, where it's just the two of them them going on an adventure together, kind of trying to solve the mysteries of the world, which obviously change book by book. And I think that is what makes this series cozy for people, even though I would not describe this series as cozy. Like, let me just read you. I remember reading this excerpt from the third book. Wow. This is from the third book, but it's not really a spoiler. Like, you're not going to understand any of this out of context. Then, in a motion as casual as the one he'd used to crush the insects, he lifted his boot and stamped on Lord Wary's leg. A sickening crack resounded through the grove. Cozy fantasy, by the way. Dela screamed. I pulled her to me and pressed her face into my neck. Just in time, too, though there seemed to be no need for it, for Lord Wary lay still in the forest floor, moaning. Taran lifted his boot again and broke his other leg. I choked down my own scream, bile rising in my throat. Lord Taran seized the blubbering Lord Wary by the collar of his cloak and dragged him easily through the trees, and then he tossed him into the rippling dark. Important to mention, in this case, that the dark is very bad and will cause imminent death. Yeah, I mean, that scene keeps going, but I think that you get the point. I just think it's kind of funny when people describe this series as cozy, because on one hand, I get it. Two investigators investigating some mysteries together and maybe even falling in love, like, that is cozy to me. I understand why people would say that, but the genre of cozy fantasy has just lost all meaning. I don't even know if it ever had meaning, if I'm being honest, to begin with. But certainly a book where we're just breaking both legs of a relatively innocent man, at least to our knowledge, and tossing him into the dark woods to be consumed by lurking evil. Like, we're calling that cozy? What are we doing, guys? What are we trying to accomplish with that descriptor? Why are we putting this on the same list as Legends and Lattes? I don't like Legends and Lattes, by the way. I thought that book was remarkably boring, probably because there are no characters who end up with both of their legs broken inside of that world. You know, there's no tension. But they just don't have anything in common beyond the fact that they're both fantasy stories. Whatever. Anyways, yeah, I wouldn't go into this expecting true romantasy. I also wouldn't go into this expecting a cozy fantasy. I would go into this hoping for, again, a more literary version of a, like, fantasy romance buddy cop movie. I gave these books in order: 4.5 stars on the reread, 4 stars, and then 4.5 for the last book. I'm pretty sure I gave book 1 4 stars the first time I read it, but honestly, I liked it even more once I knew where it was going, where we were building to. I think that the found family dynamic that the series tries to do overall with the entire cast of characters, including all of the new characters that you'll meet in the other two, is most effective in book 1. And the recurring characters that come from this book are the ones that I liked the most as well by the end of the series. Poe is my goat, my kingdom for Poe, my realm for Poe, the keys to the city to Poe. Book 2 I also really liked. I gave it 4 stars, but I was overall a little bit less engrossed, I think, with this one, in part because both book 1 and book 2 have a central village inside of them, and I just didn't like the village and the setting as much inside of this one. And a lot of the new characters in this book, again, just didn't really hit as hard as the characters from book 1, insofar as they felt a little bit like caricatures, a little bit underdeveloped, with the exception of the main central villain, and then also this wise, father figure-y old mentor that you get as well. I'm just a sucker for that trope, man. The kids yearn for Uncle Iroh, and the guy in this book is definitely like a grumpier, more jaded Uncle Iroh, but I love characters like that. I always will. Book 3 I also loved. I thought it was a fantastic end to the series, which interestingly does not seem to be a popular opinion online. I think that book 3 has the lowest rating on Goodreads, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that the way that everything wrapped up was great. Like, the conflict in this book is probably the most interesting inside of the entire series, and it's also definitely the most unique, which makes sense, right? The first two can kind of be Monster of the Week format books in a way that the third book, which is meant to wrap up all of the loose ends, really can. And I think it's successful. I think that the way that it wraps everything up is very satisfying. I do think that a critiquable component of the series overall is the fact that the lore, which, again, very important part of these books, the main character is a lore expert. That's like her whole job. It's what she's doing. The lore of this world is simultaneously very, very, very specific and also completely vibes, depending on what's going on in the story, which I think that some people might find at times a little bit unsatisfying. For me, it didn't matter. I liked what we got to know. I think I already see fairies in my head most of the time as these very capricious, abstract, strange creatures. So some of the things in the series that maybe were a little bit convenient, if we're being honest with ourselves, were able to just roll off of me because they fit into this idea that I had in my head, which is also supported a lot of the times by this book. But I do think that's a real critique that you could probably make if you cared more than I did. At the end of the day, there are some side characters I wish we'd gotten a little bit more development out of. There are some things that I wish we'd gotten the opportunity to explore explore a little bit more inside of this world. But the through line of these books and the central relationship between Wendell and Emily was so enjoyable to me that I loved this series. I think for me it was more than the sum of its parts. I loved watching a character like Emily, who was also to me pretty obviously autistic coded, watching her navigate this world and succeed and fail, and watching somebody fall in love with clearly like every single part of her, just like I did, reading from her perspective, was so delightful. There is just such a pure and naked adoration in how Wendell behaves with Emily from really the beginning of this series, even before he knows it's going to go anywhere, because of course he loves her the whole time. I mean, why else would you pick something like this up, you know? I feel like this is almost certainly a love it or hate it series. I don't really think that you're gonna read book 1 and change your mind at any point in books 2 and 3. So if you don't like that one, if you DNF it, it's not worth coming back. But if you do love it, if it does hit for you, you will enjoy, I think, every part of this trilogy. The next book that we're talking about today is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. This was the November pick in my Patreon read-along. Overall, I loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. We can just get that out of the way. Wrap-up starts good. By the time I was like 15 or 16 years old, I was no longer following John and Hank Green as closely as I had been before that point. And I've been told that if you're already a massive John Green fan and you already listen to and watch every piece of content that he puts out into the world online, this book might not really hit for you, just like his essay collection, The Anthropocene Reviewed, right here, also features a lot of stuff that he's talked about before in his other content. And probably, if you're a major John Green fan, you still read this regardless when it came out, and then you learned that for yourself, so I don't even really know why I'm saying it in this video. But the point of this is, I had only ever heard in passing that John Green was doing a lot of work with TB worldwide. I had no idea how deep it went, and I certainly did not have very many ideas about most of the content that was inside of this book, because I have the privilege where I live in Wisconsin, especially as somebody who also doesn't work in healthcare and doesn't interface with this kind of thing. I kind of thought that tuberculosis was a solved problem, which is kind of embarrassing to admit out loud on the internet, considering not only everything I learned in this book, but also just the general state of the world and the facts of life. But I'm saying it anyways because I feel like I'm a reasonably well-educated and curious person, and there are probably other reasonably well-educated and curious people who also don't know to what extent tuberculosis is still killing so many people worldwide. I don't think it's weird not to know everything. A big part of reading is so that way we can fill in our blind spots. And if it's not obvious by what I'm saying right now, and also by the title of this book being Everything is Tuberculosis, this is John Green's attempts to catalog a brief history of tuberculosis, how it impacted Western culture, how it impacts the world, how things have changed as more treatments have been discovered through history, while also giving you a present-day view of some of the millions of people who are still dying every year to a disease that as a society we have found effective treatment for. Because the thing is, tuberculosis probably should be a solved problem. We have developed a lot of really effective treatments that have virtually eradicated the disease, at least among middle and upper class people inside of the West. Because, shock, this might surprise you, but there are people getting TB and dying of it inside of America, inside of like the cities that you probably live in, wherever you are, which is kind of wild. Like that's not something that I knew about. But still, even though it exists in America, for example, even though it's mostly affecting underprivileged people in America, for example, because we have good hospitals here and good access to treatment, tuberculosis deaths in this country are only in like the 3 digits versus the 7 digits that they are in the entire world every year. John Green is a fantastic writer. I absolutely loved The Anthropocene Reviewed. This is like one of my only 5-star essay collections. I feel like I enjoy his nonfiction more than I liked any of his young adult books growing up. He's just so measured and empathetic and thoughtful and hopeful when it comes to how he talks about even the really hard stuff that he sees happening inside of the world. And this is a hard thing. This is a book about tuberculosis, obviously, but it's also a book about accessibility barriers to like basic medical care inside of the global South. It's a book that examines things like human Western corporate greed, right to life, how impossible it is, even when you're backed by the greedy, selfish stats, even when you're backed by stats like, hey, turns out preventative medical care has like an astonishingly large and inarguable economic impact when it's done correctly. Isn't that crazy? Like we can save lives, not even because they're people, but because it will pay for itself and then some. Isn't that kind of compelling to the greater world? Isn't that kind of compelling to corporations that are profit focused? No, apparently it's not. And this book isn't like super deep or complex. It's obviously not exhaustive. I mean, it's bite-sized. It's maybe 200 pages, but it knows it's not going to teach you everything. And in fact, not teaching you everything is a sacrifice that John John Green clearly chose to make in order to make this book as accessible as possible for as wide of an audience as possible. Apparently, I didn't know shit about tuberculosis before I read this book, but I did consider myself to be at least decently knowledgeable about things like the accessibility barriers that exist globally with healthcare, but this never felt trite or pointless, even when it was covering grounds I'd already kind of been on before. My point with saying that is, I think that this book is valuable. I think that you will take something meaningful from it, regardless of how much knowledge you go into it with. The thing I remember most about my experience reading this book was learning that John Keats had died at the same age that I am right now. I'm 25, and that's weird to me for a lot of different reasons. I know for a fact that this will keep happening as long as I am fortunate enough to still be alive on this planet. But it's crazy to think that in some ways I'm peak tuberculosis age right now, but because I rolled the metaphorical dice well when it came to my background, the economic opportunity that I had growing up, I'm never going to have to deal with anything like this. And I appreciate books that make me reckon with that make me reckon with my own mortality and with the things that I have access to now in the world, in the era, in the place that I'm in. Because yeah, it's insane and embarrassing and tragic that TB is still something that kills so many people. But that doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it as a collective. That's also something I think this book shows you really well. I love John Green. I think he does very good work. Next up, after that, I have a spot for all of the various murderbot books that I read over the past few months. This is just the first one for display. I got through the original quartet towards the end of last year, and then I read Fugitive Telemetry last month. I'm kind of like rationing them because at this point I'm running out, and that is distressing to me. And I did feature these recently in my best books of 2025 video, so I'm not going to talk about them very in depth. This is one of those parts of the video that ideally we are just going to glide through. I love this series. This has been, by a lot, I think the biggest comfort read that I've had in the last year. I also read all of the short stories that you're supposed to read between the quartet and the other ones, so I'm like basically caught up beyond the last 2 books. But the series overall, very briefly and very generally, follows a robot that calls itself Murderbot. Murderbot is special because even though it is a corporate robot that is owned and leased out by a company to do security on a contracting basis, not really murdering, but like murdering can be a part of the job. I mean, you never really know, right? It still does that at the beginning of the series, but it's also managed to internally hack its governor module, which means that it is no longer forced to do anything. It can like decline orders from people, although it doesn't really decline orders ever, because really all that it wants to do is just chill and watch a bunch of science fiction soap operas with its spare time. But then everything changes when it's contracted out to work with a group of people that it actually likes, and then they're put into danger. The Murderbot series, at least so far, 5 books and 3 short stories in, very episodic. They kind of all follow a similar-ish arc with some overarching themes that get developed independently throughout the entire series. But all of the books on a basic level are really just Murderbot is existing, trying to figure out what its purpose is, if it has a purpose, how it wants to move inside of the world, if it has any intrinsic value like a person would. Oh no, suddenly some people have been put into danger. Once again, it's up to Murderbot to make sure that nobody dies, and then Murderbot has to go and save them. And the entire time it's going to be like super annoyed about it. All of the books are a little bit different, but so far they all have some variety of that arc. And I love that formula. It's fantastic, and it is just such a good sandbox for the themes of this world. Themes of, again, personhood, purpose, slavery, and labor. What makes for a good life? What makes for a fulfilling existence? Forging bonds with people even when you are fundamentally different from them, both in idea and in fact, because you're a robot. The thematic storytelling of this series is fantastic, and you barely realize it's happening in the moment because the stories are also individually so well crafted and so cool. I would read like 100 different Monster of the Week Murderbot books about Murderbot going and solving various crimes and fixing various dangerous situations. All of the books in the series so far are great. I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm out of them, but so far my ratings for them have been as follows. All Systems Red was 5 stars, Artificial Condition was 4 stars, Rogue Protocol was 4 stars, and then Exit Strategy and Fugitive Telemetry were both 4.5 stars again. Those are like fairly high ratings for me. We're really bringing up the average in this video so far with doing Murderbot and Emily Wilde like one after the other. I could talk about these books individually. I don't know, maybe I'll make like a Murderbot retrospective at some point or something, but they all have, again, I think a pretty similar vibe. I feel like any differences in ratings have just been how much did I like this sidecast and this particular zany, crazy situation that Murderbot has found itself in, with definite bonus points to the first book because of how instantly I fell in love with it. But yeah, strongly recommend, especially if you're in a reading slump. You can read one of these books in 2 hours and then feel accomplished because not only did you just finish a book in 2 hours, but you also finished a book that you really liked in 2 hours, because you'll probably really like these books if you have good taste like me. Murderbot is very important to me. okay? I love this series. Next up, I have a book that represents a general goal that I have for myself to have more actual concrete reasons for my political opinions and to feel the way that I feel about the world. So I've been challenging myself to read, in addition to the fun stuff, a little bit more nonfiction, the way that I was reading more nonfiction when I was in college. I kind of like fell off the boat for a little while, but one of the ways I got back into it was finishing The Color of Law last year. I gave this book 4 stars. We can just start there. And I'll be honest, the reason that it's not a 5-star book, even though I think that informationally it's like an essential read, this is a really dry book. Like, it's written by an academic who cares a lot, also for the better, about being excruciatingly well researched, but especially comparing it to something kind of similar, Just Mercy, which is a book that's about structural inequality inside of the court system. This is just a better book in terms of like, you will enjoy it more. I mean, enjoy is maybe a strong word considering the topics that we're covering here, but like, you know what I mean. It's more fluid. The storytelling is better, but that doesn't mean that this is not also essential, especially since it's about a completely different thing. In the prologue, the author cites a specific Supreme Court decision where John Roberts wrote, "The Chief Justice noted that racially homogenous housing arrangements in these cities had led to racially homogenous student bodies in neighborhood schools. He observed that racially separate neighborhoods might result from quote-unquote societal discrimination, but said that remedying discrimination, not traceable to government's own actions, can never justify a constitutionally acceptable racially conscious remedy." The whole book honestly kind of reads like a dunk on that one particular Supreme Court decision. Like, obviously it's informed by a lot of other things too, but the thesis statement of the book overall was that segregation was not just de facto a result of a bunch of private people being racist and making private decisions throughout the 1900s into the modern day, but instead segregation was de jure, which means that it was state-sanctioned, imposed by, and enforced by the state on numerous occasions for numerous reasons that you will learn about in great detail inside of this book. Do you guys know that meme where it's like, and remember kids, the next time somebody tells you, the government wouldn't do that? Oh yes, they would. That's really the entire experience of this book. It's just page after page of, yeah, I mean, that does sound like something that would happen to Black people in this country, but like, I am still appalled learning that it really did in some kind of creative, fun, new way. A good example of that, I think, is this paragraph. "For the most part, courts have refused to reject toxic citing decisions without proof of explicit stated attempts to harm African Americans because of their race. In a 1979 Houston case, an African American community that already had a disproportionately high number of hazardous waste sites protested the addition of another. A federal judge found that the proposal was unfortunate and insensitive, but refused to ban it without proof of explicit racial motivation. A 1991 case arose in Warren County, North Carolina, whose overall population was about half white and half African American. The county had 3 existing landfills, all in African American areas. When a new landfill was proposed for a white area, residents protested, and county officials did not issue a permit. But when another was proposed, this time in an African American area, county officials ignored residents' protests and approved the landfill. A federal judge upheld the county's decision, finding that there was a discriminatory impact but no explicit racial intent. That's like a microcosm of this entire book. It's like the reason why we're not learning in school about the countless examples of de jure segregation is because of this strange standard where it's like you have to say that you hate Black people in order to be charged with something that has racist intent. And as long as you make sure that you don't put in writing anywhere that you hate Black people, then maybe you can just do whatever you want. Like that's kind of the vibe. Things that are low-key kind of still true about America for 500, Alex. Just had a thought that not all of my viewers are American. I mean, obviously, if you're not American, this book is probably not going to have as big of an impact on you. I mean, it still could be cool to read just in like a theoretical sense, but this one's pretty focused on like American housing policy, so I don't know, man. If you're into it, I guess check it out. I think that all of the arguments made in this book are made with rigorous intellectual honesty. Even later in the book, when he's talking about potential proposed solutions to remedy the impact or some of the impact of housing discrimination, I feel like he's very upfront about the imperfection of these solutions, about the costs that they would entail in a way that you would just not mention if you just wanted to make points as a gotcha. And I say this with love because I would like to think that I've accrued an audience that is fairly based and cool. A book like this is dense, it's challenging, and it's also essential if you want to have reasons to believe the things that you believe other than just trying to be a good person. And look, if you already read a lot of nonfiction, I'm not talking to you insofar as you already do this, but I am talking to you insofar as you should still read this one because it's still really good and has a lot of good information. But really, I'm talking to people like me. If you're like me, you should challenge yourself with a book like this. It's worth doing. It's worth learning about the world around you, even when the world around you is fucked. After that, hopping off of my soapbox and just doing really a complete tonal shift, complete tonal 180. The next book I read was Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. The natural next place to go, I think, after reading about systemic housing discrimination, honestly, was there a single black person living inside of all of Kringle? I don't know, man. It's a question I feel like maybe we should ask. I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna say anything about the potential for de jure segregation in the Christmas town of Kringle, other than that it's an investigation that we might want to pursue. This book sucked. I give it 1 star. I don't think I need to tell you guys very much about why it sucked, because I'm pretty sure the Venn diagram of people who watched my worst books of 2025 video, the people who watch my wrap-ups, is just a slightly smaller circle inside of that Venn diagram. And I'm not going to take us back to the dark place that this book brought me in that video. It's my hope and my dream that however bad you thought the first place book was going to be in that video, that this was worse. That's what I want for us. That's the experience that I want us to share. It was really bad. If you want to know why, I go into too much detail inside of that video, so you can just check it out, okay? I promise you that you're not going to be mad at me for spoiling this book specifically. Honestly, it's a public service. Next up, after that, the last book I read in 2025 was Hemlock and Silver. I love it when I have to talk about a book that I read forever ago on Patreon because I have so many more notes than I would otherwise have. This book follows a woman named Anya who is living inside of some ambiguous fantasy monarchy that is like desert themed instead of being normal medieval themed, which I actually really liked. I think that the setting was super cool and also a little bit underutilized. Anya is in many ways your typical middle-aged spinster with extremely strange hyperfixations, and in her case, it's poison. She knows all about poisons. She regularly doses herself with poison in order to make medicine from said poison. It's very like Apothecary Diaries core in only that way and no other ways. Like there aren't that many similarities really between the two stories, but the main characters are kind of similar. And she works as a sort of supplemental healer because she doesn't do all of like the normal healing when people get like broken bones and stuff, but she's like the only person in the entire realm who has sometimes been successful in saving people from this very specific type of drug overdose with this remedy that she's come up with using her knowledge on poisons. So she has notoriety, like people know who she is. And the premise of this book is that a normal day like any other, she's just living her life when suddenly the king shows up at her door. And the king is a fairly controversial figure right now because he's best known for recently having stabbed his wife after his wife killed his daughter. So just like a really weird turn of events. But Anya's kind of a weird gal, and she also doesn't want to like go to jail or get killed or whatever. So she hears him out when he shows up at her place. It turns out that Anya is basically the king's last hope when it comes to curing his remaining daughter, whose name is Snow, and fixing whatever strange, mysterious ailments has recently befallen her. So Anya goes to the estate where this girl is staying, and as she starts investigating this mystery, she quickly realizes that the world is not completely as it seems. If that sounds interesting to you, I would just check it out. I think that the blurb tells you a little bit more than I did about what's going on, but I feel like it's worth discovering alongside Anya if this interests you. I enjoyed this overall with a couple of caveats. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed Anya as a character, and the book's in first person, so you're spending a lot of time with her. She does admittedly have a slight not like other girls sort of energy to her, but to her credit, it's because she actually is not like other girls. Like she's 40 and really weird, and all she knows about is poison, and she's also a spinster. A lot of her character revolves around the fact that she's different from other people, and I don't think it's different derogatory. I think that it's like something that she has to reckon with because of where she is in the world, where she is in society. So that part was not annoying to me. I liked her. I thought she was cool. The overall experience of solving the mystery I also think is really cool, even though I think that the resolution of everything is just a little bit too simple. It's a little bit lame, in my opinion, compared to the build-up to get there. The main problem I think that this book has is that it is determined to be a standalone, and it's also determined to tell a relatively small story in the grand scheme of its world, and it's just completely uninterested in exploring the implications of its own world building and of its own magic system, even though those implications are way more interesting than where the story actually ended up going, in my opinion. There were just a lot of really interesting political and economic questions that arose naturally from the way that magic is manifested inside of this book, and the author does nothing with them. It's not something that she's interested in exploring. She doesn't really go beyond the bounds of this one story, which is like fine. I still liked this book overall, but it was kind of disappointing, and it makes the world building feel a little bit too open-ended, I think, when none of the implications of anything are really even considered. I also thought that this book wasted a great opportunity to be genuinely scary and spooky, because it was at first. I mean, it had a really good combination of like humor and horror, I think, around the middle of the story, that it drops off completely. All of the the tension kind of drains away, in part because of what I said earlier about how the implications of the stuff that we learn in this book, there's just no interest in dealing with them. A lot of what's scary about this book is in that empty space that we never fully explore. I still like this overall. I thought it was a good time. Mostly that's because of the writing, which is a good sign considering this was my first book by T. Kingfisher, and I've been meaning to read her books for forever. There are a bunch of others that have been high up on my reading list, so I'm definitely not writing her off or anything. I liked her writing style. I liked her world. I just wish we'd gotten to spend a little bit more time inside of it to explore the depth of what she had created. There is a romance subplot inside of this book, which I was surprised by. Like, when it started happening, I didn't really see it coming at all, which maybe reflects more on me than it does on the book, but whatever. But it was fine. I liked the dynamic that the couple had, even though the relationship was probably the most forgettable part of this book for me. Also, slightly niche reason to recommend this book, because it's not like it's a main focus or anything, but if you like Studio Ghibli, and specifically how Studio Ghibli handles character relationships with non-human entities that are viewed as malevolent but actually are kind of good, think like No Face, right, from Spirited Away. I feel like that particular variety of whimsy is very much present inside of this book. I loved the non-human characters. I thought they were delightful. And if that's a sweet spot for you, the way it is for me, you'll probably like this book, even if you end up sharing some of my negative opinions as well. Like, I think it would still be worth picking up. But yeah, that's Hemlock and Silver. Next up, I have what I think is my first unpopular opinion of the video so far, Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. This book follows a boy named Andrew who is returning for his senior year at this prestigious boarding school academy. And what we know about Andrew at the start of this book is A, he's really weird and doesn't have that many friends as a result of that because he's really quiet. B, something horrible happened at the end of last school year that was so bad that it was theorized that maybe he wouldn't even come back for his senior year, but he did. He's here. We don't know what that is. And then C, he's part of kind of a trio on campus that is him, his twin sister, and then this other friend that they have whose name is Thomas. Thomas and his sister had a massive falling out right before summer vacation that still has not been healed, and things are also, as a result, kind of weird between him and his sister. And then lastly, D, Andrew is so obviously in love with Thomas and has been for some time. So that's the status socially for Andrew going back for his senior year. And things get even worse because when he goes back to his academy and he meets back up with Thomas, who he hasn't been able to talk to really for most of summer vacation, it turns out Thomas's parents, who are also just abusive and implied to be really, really awful, they're missing. And Thomas is acting really, really suspicious about it and also getting interrogated by the police, and rumors are spreading around the school about how he's a murderer. And also, because they bunk together, Andrew notices that Thomas is leaving the room every single night and like barely getting any sleep. And one night he follows Thomas out to the woods where all of these students are told that they can never go, and he learns that Thomas is leaving every night to go and fight monsters. In fact, he's leaving every night to go and fight the very same monsters that he used to draw. He's a big like artist kind of guy. Andrew, on the other hand, big writer. He writes a lot of scary stories, and then Thomas draws the monsters from the scary stories, and now they're coming to life. And that's really like the gist, I would say, of what's going on. The tone of this book is a little bit inconsistent because on one hand, you have these two boys that are going out every night to go and fight unfathomably evil, freaky monsters that are kind of like manifestations of their own fears. And they're also trying to figure out why these monsters exist and where they're coming from, which requires them to unpack all of their various traumas. So yeah, it's just like a pretty sinister, dark vibe. But then on the other hand, you have this kind of like found family queer coming of age story where like Andrew joins GSA and learns that you can simultaneously be asexual and also like attracted romantically to people like he is to Thomas. And maybe he's not so weird after all, and he can like make friends and find community. That's also happening inside of this book. And so the chapters can really vary a lot in terms of the vibe, in terms of the tone. I thought the combination of genres it was sort of doing was unsatisfying and kind of weird. A lot about this book is unsatisfying and kind of weird in my opinion, and most of that actually doesn't come from the genre balance. Most of it comes from the writing style, and then also some of the plot decisions that I'm not going to talk too in depth about because they're spoilers, but the plot decisions that happen in the back 20% of this book and the eventual resolution. And let's start with the writing. Okay, unks like me who were on Tumblr 10 years ago. Do you guys remember how we used to like take characters from Sherlock and we would replace their eyes with flowers and like superimpose an image of a human skeleton in a similar position onto John Watson looking at Sherlock from across a busy room because like it was edgy and meaningful and we're all just skin and bones who fall in love? Do you guys remember that? Do you guys remember the edits where it's just a picture of Castiel with a ribcage edited over top of him, and then also edits of like thorns and flowers growing out of the ribcage, and then the caption is, "I'm the one who gripped you tight and raised you from perdition." Were you there for that? I was there for that. I was present. I was accounted for. before, and I'm bringing you back to this time. I'm establishing this sense of place because it is the only analog I can give you to the writing in this book. I know that CJ Drews was reposting the same edits that I was reposting 10 years ago. I probably read some of their fanfic. I've read some of their Destiel poetry. But in the big year of 2026, I can't do it anymore. I cannot abide quotes like this. It hadn't hurt the day he had cut out his own heart. Andrew had written about it later in spidery lines from a sharp pen, a story about a boy who took a knife to his chest and carved himself open, showing ribs like mossy tree roots, his heart a bruised and wretched thing beneath. No one would want a heart like his, but he'd still cut it out and given it away. That's the opening line of this book. I already knew. I was already transported to that place just with line 1. The other kids mucked around, but Andrew fell in love with the woods. It was quiet there, and the trees seemed like they could keep secrets. But there was one boy who obviously loves the forest more than Andrew, a freckled kid with a reckless mouth and hair kissed by the devil. Once Andrew started watching him, he couldn't look away. Thomas Rye was a wild thing. He was everywhere at once, climbing trees and throwing rocks, racing ahead and exploring off the path. The entire forest rang with his name because a teacher was always shouting for him. Only Andrew saw Thomas kiss the tree. It wasn't a performance. This boy did what he wanted on impulse and regretted nothing. This one too. Andrew was sure of one bitter truth. He'd rather have his lungs punctured than watch Dove and Thomas fall in love. Sometimes he'd lie awake at night and unpack all his feelings about this boy-shaped hurricane named Thomas Rye. Boy-shaped hurricane, I think we've seen that one before. This was what Andrew did. Told stories. Ones with dark, bitter corners, and magic curled into thorns. Ones about monsters with elegant, razor-like teeth. He wrote fairy tales, but cruel. Thomas loves them. And the book, like, with love, it even has, I think, a little bit of a hint of the ED culture that was glorified on Tumblr. Just shit like this. It was early in autumn to be shivering this much, but Andrew never had stamina for the cold. He was too thin these days, he knew, but he couldn't eat. If he layered up with sweaters and avoided Dove with her sharp perception, he thought he'd get away with it. He figured Thomas wouldn't notice how much weight he'd lost, not if he was careful to never take his shirt off and show the way the bones seemed ready to cut free of skin. And with that kind of thing specifically, the reason why it's reminiscent of like weird ED culture on Tumblr in the 2010s is that nothing ever happens with it. Like there's no big confrontation where it's like eat more king and he goes through character development. It's kind of just like romanticized as a part of all of this tortured shit that's happening to him because he's like a tortured, angsty soul, you know? So as a result of that, he has to not eat. And I'm trying to be charitable here because I'm sure that probably wasn't the intention of the author to like sauce some weird ED imagery into their book. That's very reminiscent of, ooh, so thin that plants are growing outside of me off of Tumblr in the 2010s. But that's just another reason why it's so reminiscent of this exact era to the point where it's infiltrating the story of this book. Like, you can just tell that this author was forged in that crucible, man. I don't know what else to tell you. I hope that's obvious by some of the quotes that I've been reading, but I also feel like these quotes are not giving a good enough picture of what I mean. You had to be there. It burrowed between his ribs, the frustration of it. Everyone saw Andrew as shattered and fragile, and maybe he was to them. But when Thomas looked at Andrew's sharp edges, he thought them dangerous and beautiful, not weak. He could cut me to bloody pieces if he wanted. Andrew hated the way he loved those words. Look at me with a straight face and tell me that couldn't be the last line to a one-shot posted direct to blog, written off of an ask with a phantom writing prompt that's like, alternate universe, post-World War II, Steve comes back from war, and it's Stucky. Like, you can't tell me that because you can't trick me, dude. I was forged in that very same crucible. I actually wasn't that big into Stucky because I wasn't a Marvel girl, but I am aware of its cultural impact. And again, it's like I'm trying to be honorable and think about this from the perspective of a young adult, and Tumblr, it was hitting at that time period. It really was. I was there. It was rare. I remember it all too well. So maybe the writing in this book really will be a hit with kids these days, with the weird teens of today, in the same way that it might have been a hit with the weird teens of yesterday, aka me. But I can't do it, man. It's so egregiously melodramatic to the point where it made me dislike the main character because I was just so sick of the way that he was seeing the world. I was so over it that I started finding him unbearably annoying. And I'm not saying that C.G. Drews is a bad writer. Like, I do think that it's obvious that they have a strong command of the English language, in quotes that I'm not reading you, that are good. There are good lines inside of this book because guess what? Like, people who wrote fanfic on Tumblr, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They were good at it. It was fun. People were dropping straight bars in random ask responses that kids today could not even fathom. I do see glimmers of that inside of this book, and that's good. It's a good sign. I just wish that overall the writing style style was even a little bit like mature and down to earth. Even slightly, I think would have made a big impact, because there are parts of this book that are like worth being melodramatic about, because what's happening is nuts. Like they're literally killing nightmare monsters all of the time. Pretty intense, you know, you can be dramatic about that. You're kind of allowed to. You're also allowed to be a little bit dramatic, I think, as a teenager about things like coming to terms with your sexuality. That makes sense to me, but literally everything all of the time is a step too far. I can't handle it. I can't. So yeah, that was my big dig with this book, is just that it reads like mediocre fanfic off of Tumblr a lot of the time. With love, because I was there. This is own voices. But also, in addition to that, I felt like the plot direction was just, it was vibey to the point of non-existence. The ending of this book is almost completely abstract in a way that I just kind of thought was dumb. I just thought it felt unfinished. I'm sorry I'm not fun enough to have hopped onto this ride and enjoyed the ending of this book, but like I predicted the big plot twist at like 80% or whatever so early in the book. So when it finally happened, for it to just have gone how it did, I was like, what's even the point of me being here? Worth noting with that for the central conceit of this book to function whatsoever, the entire student body and all of the staff have to be like cartoonishly evil all of the time, which they are. They're very evil, and therefore the conflict does kind of make in-universe sense. But like, you really have to suspend your disbelief, because there's no way that people would act this way. And at the same time, like nothing about the book would spoil the main twist. Like that just, it doesn't make any sense, dude. It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, how figurative and intangible and vibey and abstract this ending was just such a stark contrast to the entire book being about a fairly tangible issue, largely miscommunication. There's other stuff going on as well, but like it was a solvable and tangible problem. And then suddenly the ending is like, and what happened next? Ooh, some colors and some vines and the woods and some crazy stuff. Like, it's so strange and, in my opinion, disconnected from the rest of the story. But I don't know, man. Look, a lot of people love this book. Basically, everybody that I've seen review this book really, really likes it. I did not. I gave it 2 stars. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet, but in case I haven't, now I have. But I do think the story inside of here is meaningful. I think that Andrew's arc, in terms of his sexuality, his trauma, everything to do with his character, is like a meaningful and heartbreaking story that I just think was really poorly executed. Just not for me. I might try another book by theirs, because I've heard that all of their books are really, really good. People always comp this author to Andrew Joseph White, almost certainly because they are part of this vanishingly small number of trans authors that are writing specifically horror inside of young adult. But those of you who have been here for a minute know that I love Andrew Joseph White. I think he's fantastic. This did not hold a candle, in my opinion. I also think the books stylistically are pretty different. So yeah, not a recommendation that works for me, but if anybody does know of any similar young adult horror that is good, I'd love to read it. I don't know, maybe I'll try one of their other books, but not soon. I don't think I will try that soon. Taking a break from filming to have some sushi. Wow, what a cool casual video Newly Nova is putting out, where I can have dinner with all of you in the middle of a wrap up. And then afterwards, I'll still have 7 books to go. Woo! The sushi has been demolished. I'm so back. Next up, turbo banger. We have The Tainted Cup. This was the January buddy read inside of my Patreon, and it was so good. It's probably my favorite book that I'm talking about in this video, if you accept the sum total of the Murderbot Diaries, which I probably did like more overall as a series, but just as one book, this got 5 stars for me. We could just start there. Big shout out to all of my minions out there who went on to read The Raven Scholar on my recommendation and loved it. I appreciate it. It's like my favorite comment to get, and I have another one for you. This is exactly the kind of book I think that you'll enjoy if you liked The Raven Scholar, because it has a lot of crucial similarities. This is about a super eccentric investigator named Anna and her apprentice, whose name is Din, and they are investigating this mystery that is brought to their attention when an Imperial officer inside of this fantasy world is discovered dead. The method of death is that a literal tree has grown up out of his body, which obviously would kill you. I mean, I would be surprised, I think, if a tree could grow through your whole body and then you would be alive. I think that would be more impressive. The greater world of this book that is constantly happening around them as they are investigating is very similar to like an oceanic cyberpunk Attack on Titan, except instead of standard technology, you have these like fantasy botanicals and plants that are used instead as the body mods and as like the performance enhancing, life-changing stuff. But you have these ocean leviathans that are basically titans that are constantly knocking once a year to try to break into the city. You have a bunch of walls that separate the outside by the coast from the inner city where all of like the super big rich people live. And there are definitely ways where it feels substantially different from Attack on Titan, but on a base level, like you can see the inspiration, you can see the through lines. And for me, that's a good thing. Like as soon as the facts of this world became clear, I was like, hell yeah, sign me up. That sounds awesome. And it was awesome. Anna and Din, as they're investigating, they're not like an established pairing. Very much it's a new thing. Din has just been hired to help with Anna's stuff. And the reason that Anna needs an assistant is because she does not like going outside. She does not like investigating. She doesn't like talking to people. What she likes is solving problems. She likes putting puzzle pieces together and solving mysteries. Fortunately for her, in her proclivities, she's able to hire an assistant like Din, an assistant who is in this universe called an engraver, which means that Din's body mod gives him what is functionally like even better photographic memory, where he can perfectly remember every single thing that he sees, describe it as if he's still there. He can remember conversations perfectly and like speak in the exact same tone of voice of the person that he was talking to when he was investigating. And the book is from the perspective of Din. So you're following him as he's investigating this crime, as he and Anna are uncovering, of course, ultimately like a twisted web of nonsense that's happening underneath the surface of what at first seems like a relatively simple closed room mystery, right? Like it's never going to be that simple. I fucking loved this book. It was such a good time. If you're a fan of like a traditional Agatha Christie style mystery where you have an investigator and then at the end they like bring everybody into a room and they talk about exactly how the crime was committed in front of everybody and then they like point at the subject and they're like, aha, it was you. That is very much the tradition that this story is in. Also very similar to something like a Knives Out or a Glass Onion. Those movies that I love, that a lot of people have loved recently, if you like those, if you like the way that those stories are constructed, very, very much in the same vein. Because this book is a little bit longer and the mysteries are a bit more complex, there are multiple moments where Din is bringing all of this information to Anna. She's confronting subjects. She's putting together all of the puzzle pieces in a way where you're just like, yas, this is awesome. And also, again, all of that is layered on top of this really interesting geopolitical backdrop that we're not even fully exploring in this book. Like we're solving a mystery inside of this book, and the mystery has implications, of course, for the rest of the world that you're seeing happen around all of this crime, but you're just getting little like world building morsels to chew on constantly, and they are succulent, they are delicious. And honestly, I hope that this author milks those morsels for as many books as possible. I do not want this to just be a trilogy. Like I would read probably 50 of these. I actually just started the second one yesterday, which I took a little bit of a break because you gotta ration them when you only have two. I mean, I invested early, dude. I don't know what else to say. I love Anna. I love Din. I think they're both really, really interesting, cool, likable characters, and they make for a fantastic duo that isn't romantic whatsoever, so you don't have to worry about that if that's something that would bug you. In fact, you will discover that Din is actually a bi icon, so you have that to look forward to. But yeah, I loved both of them. I think they make a great team. I don't really have anything else to say beyond just emphatically recommending this to anybody who even sort of likes mysteries. If you have ever cracked even a shadow of a smile during the parlor room scene in Knives Out or something similar, please, please pick this up. It's so much fun. Next up, following that up with my other unpopular opinion, I think, for this video, and it is To Shape a Dragon's Breath. This one was really tough because I went into it with really high expectations since a lot of people I trust on the internet really, really love this book. Also, just the back of the book sounds pretty sick. I definitely picked it up at a time in my life that was pretty intense. I had a lot of stuff in terms of like family emergencies going on around me, and I wanted a little anti-colonial magic school pick-me-up to make me feel better. So I thought I would really love this, but I ended up only giving it 3 stars, and it was like a really confused 3 stars because depending on what I think about when I think about this book, I could range anywhere from 2 to 4. I think that this had some serious pros and some serious cons, and I'll tell you what those are, but first, let me tell you what this is about. So this book follows a 15-year-old indigenous girl named Anakus who lives on this island that, even though they haven't been conquered, they haven't been like booted off of the island, they're very much still under the thumb of colonial rule. I mean, the book is very much supposed to just be a fantasy version of like colonial America, which we'll get back to this later, but you can see by the map that we get in the book is just a map of the world, except places have different names. Anakus and her people are doing pretty well for the most part, especially in comparison to some other tribes, because definitely like they are the exception, not the rule, and even then the balance is fraught. One generation prior to the beginning of this book, another island tribe was basically raised by the English, which is the name of the colonial power. It's like English but with an A. They're English. And obviously that was unbelievably tragic. It definitely affected Anakus's tribe. I mean, her dad had like a ton of relatives that were on that island who were killed. But for the time being, her people specifically are doing okay. I mentioned earlier that this is a fantasy AU of actual history, and the fantasy part is that everyone has dragons. And the dragons are used for a lot of things, but mostly they're used right now for war crimes. At least like the people that we know who have dragons, they're mostly using them for war crimes, which is not ideal. And a few generations ago, before the English came, Anakus's people used to have dragons, but now they don't. A dragon has not been seen there for many years, until one day Anakus comes across a dragon egg, and it's the first dragon egg that they've had in forever. Obviously, her entire tribe is like, this is so sick, this is very momentous, both spiritually and in terms of like what this could mean for our people and our culture, because it turns out that dragons are actually capable of things other than war crimes. They can like change the weather and do some transmutations and stuff, and it's all really useful. So yeah, very exciting. Dragon hatches, chooses Anakus as its like bonded human dragon rider, as dragons are wont to do after they hatch. And everything is going according to plan until the English find out that her tribe has a dragon. And immediately they send over a rider who is like, hey, you have to come over and enroll in an English dragon school, and if you don't, we're definitely going to kill the dragon. Maybe also you, and maybe also everybody that you know. We're not really sure yet, but like, we won't even have to decide if you just come to our dragon school. So obviously Anakus goes to the dragon school, which also has the side benefit of, because her people haven't had dragons in so many generations, the art of caring for a dragon and helping it control its power, helping it shape its breath, if you will. It's kind of a lost art. And dragons are also really powerful. They can like hurt people if they're not helped correctly. So like, yes, Anakus has to go to the dragon school or else they might kill everybody that she loves. But also she does like a little want to go there because she wants to learn what she can from these people. And then instead of joining their armies or whatever everybody else expects her to do, she just wants to graduate from the dragon school and take all of her knowledge back to her community and use it to like make their lives better on their island, you know? Normal stuff. That's the basic premise. It's just Anakus going to the school, learning what there is to learn about dragons, and also facing a lot of different prejudices from all of the white kids who are at this school, and also a lot of the adults, because it turns out that a lot of the people in this era, even people who like thought that they were doing good things, turns out they were pretty awful. When this book is at its best, it reminds me of a lot of the good parts of Harry Potter, except written by somebody who isn't evil. And I really liked a lot of the scenes that took place at the school in these classes, interfacing with other students and with the teachers. Magic schools are kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, so I had a good time with this one, even when it verged a little bit on info dumpy during her lessons. Dragon magic in this universe is very periodic table core, and you learn a lot of stuff that is really just the periodic table and like them drawing atoms, but they're describing it in a way that obfuscates the fact that they're just learning about the periodic table and drawing atoms, whatever. I still thought it was pretty fun. I liked the writing. I thought that the storytelling was pretty good overall, even if the pacing wasn't always perfect. And especially when it comes to the group of friends that Anakus forms at this academy, I liked them a lot. I think the side cast is pretty interesting. The character Theod in particular, who is the only other indigenous person who is at this Dragon Academy, but like has a completely different background from Anakus. He was the kid of a couple of people who died in the Islands Massacre that I mentioned earlier. So he's been raised his entire life as functionally an indentured servant in English society and has like a lot of really interesting complex feelings about what connection that gives him to other indigenous people, if any connection at all. And I feel like he was a fantastic foil to the confidence and the self-assuredness of Anakus, because Anakus herself as a protagonist is easily my biggest issue with this book. Problem with Anakus is that there are no problems whatsoever with Anakus. She's like a quintessential Mary Sue. And I feel like the reason that this was allowed to fly inside of this book is because Anakus does make mistakes. Like, she does make errors. But the thing is, her mistakes and errors are like never mistakes. They're just, she does something that is not perfectly in line with English society or English standards, and then everybody else gets mad at her and they're like, well, why'd you do that? And she's like, well, why do you do the things that you do? Because they seem kind of backwards and stupid. But like the whole time as the reader, you never thought that she was in the wrong to begin with. It never really felt like she made a mistake, because the worst thing, the most like out of pocket thing that she does in this whole book is slapping a kid when he starts asking her like really inappropriate racist questions about when people of her age marry inside of her tribe. It's really fucked up, and she slaps him, and the people in the book are like, ooh, you shouldn't have slapped him. But again, I, the reader, I'm like, I don't know, man. I think that if you act racist and perverted and sinister all at the same time and then you get slapped, I don't think it should like come as a surprise to anybody involved in the situation. But like, that is really the only way that Anakus snaps inside of this book. And again, she's in the right for it. And not only does that make her really boring as a character, she's also really unrealistic unrealistic, I think, as a 15-year-old. She has an unbelievable amount of zen with which she moves through the world. Like, she's the most self-assured person I have ever seen in my entire life. Unbelievably measured and level-headed, even though she's being faced with basically every classic stereotypical racism that you can expect from the book of how white people still to this day oftentimes, but especially back then, interacted with indigenous people, right? And so much of this book are just scene after scene of Anakus experiences a racism of some kind. Following this, Anakus will gracefully explain why they're in the wrong with like an unbelievable amount of magnanimity. Following that, the perpetrator of the racism will either A, immediately reform and get at least a little bit better because like Anakus made some really good points. B, they won't really reform, but they'll still fall in line immediately because again, they're really embarrassed. So they just like make some kind of transparent excuse about their racism and then we all move on from the situation. Or C, they'll react badly, maybe they'll say another racism or like threaten to bring in some kind of establishment figure that will also do racisms. But then the situation diffuses and nothing really comes of it. And that character has no further impact on the story for the most part. Variants of that scene are like a lot of this book. And I don't know, man, like it felt so unrealistic to me that Anakus was just always perfectly wise and cool and level in like basically all of her interactions. She always makes good points. She only ever does something a little bit chaotic when she's absolutely pushed to the brink. She's always responding as well to dangerous situations that could arise, that could impact her or people that she loves with an unbelievable amount of precognition. Like she predicts that something bad could happen and she makes arrangements so that nothing bad will happen. And I don't know, man, I feel like the decision to have made Anakus into this like 65-year-old elder living inside of a 15-year-old's body was so bad when it came to actually making the issues in this book feel anything other than surface level. Despite the fact that this is a book that's about things like genocide and colonial violence and just all of the horrible ways that the world can treat you when you're brown, Anakus doesn't really face in the moment real conflict. It feels like she doesn't really face real consequences. She doesn't make realistic errors and then have to like pick up the pieces of that and figure out what to do from that point. And that just kind of sucks because the history that you're getting, the lore that we learn inside of this book, sets a good foundation for a story that is about resilience, that is tragic, that is heartbreaking, but ultimately really empowering, really meaningful. All of that groundwork is there and just nothing, it feels like nothing is done with it. But with this one in particular, and like whenever I critique a book this way, you should just think about it for a second because like I'm a white girl, what the fuck do I know? If I'm a person of color who's like 15 reading this book for the first time and I like see myself reflected in it, that's awesome. That's a good thing. I'm glad it exists for that reason. And there are a lot of people who find stories like this to be incredibly meaningful. And that's good. That's great. I don't want to take that away from anybody. And I'm definitely not in the target audience for this book. Okay. Like maybe if I am 15 also, and I'm less knowledgeable about a lot of the world issues that I feel like are hit on a little bit surface level inside of this book, maybe I like it more, you know, if it's like my first exposure to these things. I'm not 15. I'm 25. I'm jaded. I'm unk. I've got no money and no prospects and I'm already a burden to my parents. And that's okay. That's fine. But it also probably contributes to a lot of what I didn't like about this book. Okay, so here's the thing. With that book done, I've just filled up my first SD card, which means I have 5 hours and 20 minutes of footage. We'll see what that condenses to. That'll tell you a lot about my editing process, probably. And you know what? Wisdom is knowing when I've done too much. So I'm gonna do 2 more books, and then the other 3 that I have here, I mean, I guess you weren't even keeping count, so what do you know? But I was going to talk about 5 more. I'm only gonna talk about 2 more. And then the books I read so far this March, I'm gonna save for my next wrap up. So that way my next wrap up is like 2 months, maybe even 1. I don't know what I'll read this month. Probably not 1. I think this video is probably gonna come out in like a week at the end of the month. But these last 2 I'm gonna do because in theory, I don't think that they're going to take as long to talk about. So second to last book that we're talking about today is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which is a short story collection. Whenever I read a short story collection, I always shill them on this channel as if I read them all the time, even though I don't, but I should because I really like them. The best part about short story collections, which you've heard before if you've been here before, because they're short stories that you can finish in the span of like 20 to 45 minutes, they are really, really easy to fit in if you have a busy schedule, or if you don't have a lot of time to read, or just if you want to like challenge yourself to pick up a collection and you read one before bed every night, that's not going to be a major sink on your time. This short story collection actually has a pretty strong central through line that not every collection is going to have, where all of these stories in some capacity feature Black women who are trying and failing and succeeding in navigating through life, and all of them either currently or at some point were very enmeshed in a church community. Lots of themes of like queerness and religious trauma and the dark underbelly that you see at church, and also the joy and light and community that you can find as well, and like just how you go through life and form your own identity as you grow up inside of and around these spaces. And all of the stories beyond that are quite different, but they definitely fit underneath this overall umbrella. In this book, we get stories about these two women who are lifelong best friends, who are enmeshed in this like romantic and sexual entanglement, even though one of them refuses to admit that it's what she wants for her future, although the other one is all in. There's a story that takes the form of a letter that these sisters are writing to a woman that they discover is their long lost sister of their like horrible philandering father who has recently passed away. There's a love story that is written entirely in second person about this avoidant woman who meets at a conference this guy that she really, really likes, but doesn't really feel capable of actually loving all the way, in part because of her self-image problems. Probably my favorite story in the collection is about this daughter of a single mom who watches as her mom makes peach cobbler every single week for the pastor at their local church, who is cheating on his wife and, by extension, his whole family with her mom. And this girl ends up tutoring and entering into a sort of relationship with the son of this family, and like everything comes together inside of the story. It's just really, really good. I mean, short stories are hard to describe because like everything is spoilers when something is only 20 pages long. And because of that, yeah, I mean, you do kind of just have to take my word for it when I say that. I think this book is really good. I think that the author has a great eye for character and for finding the humanity in all of the people that she writes about. She's really good at establishing full lives, full people, even in very short stories, which is an incredible skill. I mean, I've read books in this video that I feel like did a really bad job at that were 400 pages instead of 20, right? Like with many short story collections, they're not all of like perfectly equivalent quality. You know, there are definitely stories I liked more. But with that said, for this one specifically, I don't really think there were any duds. I don't really think there were any stories that I thought were like bad. So that's definitely a point in this book's favor. Just really good. I think if you're looking for a short story collection, this was a very memorable one. The last book I'm talking about in this video was also my February buddy read on Patreon, which was One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. This was also off of my winter TBR, which was very fortuitous, honestly. I got to kill two birds with one stone. And this made a lot of waves last year when it came out, although I haven't heard a massive amount about it since. But this is partially a memoir, partially a work of cultural criticism, partially like an argumentative treatise about all of the ways that the West has failed the world at large, and also of all of the ways that the people within the West are failing to hold our institutions to account. Ellicott is not Palestinian himself. He's originally from Egypt, but he grew up, I think, in Qatar and then moves to Canada. But despite all of that, the center point of this book is very much the genocide that's happening right now in Gaza. There are lots of really good quotes inside of this book, but I'm gonna read one from somewhere in the middle that I think captures one of the main thesis points of this book. There is an impulse in moments like this to appeal to self-interest, to say, these horrors you are allowing to happen, they will come to your doorstep one day. To repeat the famous phrase about who they came for first and who they'll come for next. But this appeal cannot, in matter of fact, work. If the people well served by a system that condones such butchery ever truly believed the same butchery could one day be inflicted on them, they'd tear the system down tomorrow. And anyway, by the time such a thing happens, the rest of us will already be dead. No, there is no terrible thing coming for you in some distant future, but know that a terrible thing is happening to you now. You are being asked to kill off a part of you that would otherwise scream in opposition to injustice. You are being asked to dismantle the machinery of a functioning conscience. Who cares if diplomatic expediency prefers you shrug away the sight of dismembered children? Who cares if great distance from the bloodstained middle allows obliviousness? Forget pity, forget even the dead if you must, but at least fight against the theft of your soul. Because ultimately, that's the main argument that this book is making, right? It's this idea that people are choosing to be willfully ignorant, willfully blind of all of the horrible things that happen in the world because, like, it's easier that way, and they don't have to think about it because it's not happening to them. And then later down the road, in like 20 or 30 or 40 years, however long it takes for things to get better over there, at that point, those same people are going to be looking back and thinking, oh, that was horrible. That was the worst thing ever. I never thought it was okay. And the book is admitting, yeah, I mean, especially if you're like a cis white person living in the West, probably you're not gonna die and like watch your kid be blown up or whatever, but isn't choosing to ignore that, isn't choosing not to call that out as wrong, isn't that itself kind of a form of death? Isn't that itself kind of like killing off all of the parts of you that matter? If you can look at that situation and say, that's not that bad, that's not worth my attention, that's not worth caring about. And that's not the only point that this book is making. Like, it's also very critical about the political system in the US. It's very critical article about performative activism and the liberal desire to be seen as good as opposed to actually doing good things. It's got a lot to say about things like the immigrant experience in the US and in Canada. There's actually a quote on that I also want to read because I think it's really good. Immigrants are supposed to be grateful. The narrative arc of immigration, in which one flees their own failing society to come to a better place, a country that was under no obligation to accept them but did, demands perpetual gratitude. And it exists, this gratitude, but the narrative makes no room for the many shapes it comes in, its many less straightforward forms. I harbor no ill will toward the immigrant who waves a miniature flag on the sides of the Independence Day parade, who says honestly and plainly, "I love this country." But nor do I judge the immigrant who is as emotionless and pragmatic about the nation-state as the people who run that nation-state are so regularly emotionless and pragmatic about immigrants, who says honestly and plainly, "I don't love this country, don't love any country," patriotism being the property of an entirely different kind of life than luck has given me. I live here because it will always be safer to live on the launching side of the missiles. I live here because I am afraid. And yeah, I mean, this book is definitely covering a lot of ground. It's a very particular kind of book because I would not recommend this as like the only thing, the only access that you have, for example, to news about what's happening in Palestine, because it definitely assumes a lot of background knowledge. Like, you're not going to learn a lot of new facts about the situation, a lot of new facts about history, because it's not really the goal of the author. Again, you can kind of think about this as a sort of argumentative treatise. The arguments of this book are informed by the context of what is happening. They're informed by stories from the author's life, but the goal of this is not really to educate you. It's to make you think about this entire system of empire in a different way. And I think it's really successful at that. To my like super lefty viewers, you probably are not going to learn very many new things inside of this book or like think very many new thoughts, but you might still love it. I mean, I have friends who very much still loved this book, but the target audience for this definitely is people who are a little bit more confused and uncertain about where they stand, and especially uncertain too about like what they can do about it, about like what there is really to be done when something like this is happening and the people doing it are like the government, and there's only really so much that you can do as an individual singular human being when you're watching your government that is supposed to represent you do all of these horrible things. And I think for a lot of people who feel that way, it's easy to think, oh, like I can't fix it, I can't stop the genocide in Gaza, so I guess I'm not going to do anything because like nothing is going to be enough, nothing will help. And I think the best thing that this book does is emphasizing the idea that whatever you do, no, it's not going to be enough because like it's not going to solve the problem, but like that doesn't make it not worth doing. That doesn't make it not worth saying something or using your voice in a small way. Or hey, like if that's not safe for you, if you're not comfortable doing that, there are other ways to like negatively resist, to make a small impact that is infinitely better than making no impact. And I think this book puts it really, really well when it says that even the smallest acts of resistance, like, I don't know, not buying Sabra hummus or something, even something like that feels pathetically unimportant in the face of the enormity of everything that's happening, every small act of resistance trains the muscle used to do it, in much the same way that turning one's eyes from the horror strengthens that particular muscle, readies it to ignore even greater horror to come. One builds the muscle by walking away from the most minor things, trivial consumables, the cultural work of monsters, the myriad material fruits grown on stolen ground, and realizes in the doing of these things that there is a wide spectrum of negative resistance. And also in tandem with that, this quote, "The director of a literary organization I admire, acknowledging at the start of a reading that so much of what we do right now feels so pointless, returns still to the rallying cry issued by the Palestinian poet Rasha Abdul Hadi. Wherever you are, whatever sand you can throw on the gears of genocide, do it now. If it's a handful, throw it. If it's a fingernail full, scrape it out and throw. Get in the way however you can." I just think that's a really important takeaway from this book because, I mean, you shouldn't like pat yourself on the back as if you're solving genocide and like curing cancer and saving the world every time you choose not to buy hummus or whatever. That would be ridiculous. That's just you wanting to feel good about yourself. You're not like magically a better person than everybody else just because you do something relatively minor, but that's not the point. Point is that you're still a human being. You're still a human being who is capable of seeing and recognizing the suffering of the Palestinian people, of people all over the world who aren't Palestinian, who are facing this level of injustice, right? You're not going to be able or willing probably to do everything that you could possibly do. That's just, it's not realistic, but whatever small thing you can do that feels like it's pathetic, that feels like it can't possibly be enough, it's still worth doing. And who knows, through training that muscle of resistance, maybe in the future you're able to do more. Maybe in the future you're able to make more real impact. But like, it's worth making the small impact knowing that with 300 million strong, that small impact could be a big fucking deal that will never come to pass if nobody believes it matters. There are a lot of good things to take away from this book, but that was the one that I feel most compelled to share on my public platform. Other than that, you should probably just read this if you want to be like a globally conscious citizen. I think that this is a great book that is, I mean, it's a hard read because it's really sad and it's really dense and it's real and it's tragic because of it. But it's also only like 200 pages, written very accessibly by somebody who is like very good at the craft of writing. It's not dense is the point. It's pretty easy to read, even if it's a very hard read, if you know what I'm saying. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm like trying to make sense, but it's been hours and I'm still here. And now I'm talking about a book that was very meaningful to me and that also made me cry a few times. And I'm trying to demonstrate to you that this book is worth reading. It's really, really good. I think it lived up to the hype, in my opinion. It was about what I expected it to be in all of the right ways. And whatever tiny, minor critiques and like slight ideological differences that I might have with the author, honestly, they don't fucking matter. They don't matter because the central thesis of this book, the central point here that we're talking about is like so important in the most humanitarian of senses. And it makes a book like this essential if you've never read anything like it before. But yeah, that's everything I think with this book that I wanted to talk about. And therefore, that's everything that's going to be inside of this wrap up. Can you believe that you were almost here for even longer talking about 3 more books? I can't believe that. Those 3 books, they're gonna be spicy. You're probably gonna be seeing one of them on this channel closer than you think. Closer than you think if I'm ever free from what I'm subjecting myself to. Anyways, let me know what you read ever, I guess, since this video started before the dawn of time. If you enjoyed this video, I do a lot of stuff like this on my channel. In fact, wrap-ups are really the bulk of what I've been doing recently, although hopefully now that things are less insane, that will kind of start to change. Reminder to check out my lovely partner Surfshark. You can click the link in my description to do so and get that cool deal that I mentioned earlier. I hope that you guys have a good day. I hope you've had a good month. I would say that I'll see you soon, but like I don't want to set expectations anymore. I don't want to set expectations ever again. So I'll see you when I see you again with something that I think you'll really find fun. If you don't find it fun, I'll just fucking throw myself into the sea, I guess. But just don't tell me if you don't find it fun. Okay, yeah, time to go. That's everything that I have to say. Love you guys. Thanks for being here. Hope you liked these reviews. Haha. Okay, bye.